Hey everybody, imagine yourself locked behind a door. The cell has just shut. You committed a crime, and now you're about to serve time in prison. But this alone should be the punishment. Once it's complete, it's over, right? Fortunately, that's not the way our country works, and several others like it. They continue to impose unofficial sanctions on them. The incarcerated pay their debt to society by completing their sentence, which was decided and prescribed by a courtroom, judge, jury, and legislature. The sentence that the offender served was determined to be sufficient enough that would be the extent of the punishment. Offenders that have re-entered society are faced with challenges that do not affect the average citizen. They can't vote and thus have no say in their surroundings, or at least the choice not to participate. They have no access to federal funding and cannot receive student loans, therefore limiting their options for a higher education. The most drastic condition in which these offenders face is how they earn a living once released back into society. It's imperative that this is changed. If the prison time was not sufficient enough on addressing this very issue, then there needs to be a public policy change for that. Convicts may not have punishment continue to be inflicted upon them after release if their debt to society has been paid. Offenders are limited to a much smaller employment market. Not only are they generally banned from holding any government office or enlisting the military for the most part, they have to check the box that inquires if they've ever been convicted of a felony. This commences the prejudice right away. Robert Appel, an author of Social Problems, discovered research findings with respect to the relationship between incarceration and employment are consistent enough that it's tempting to conclude that incarceration causes deterioration in ex-inmates' employment prospects. This illustration right off the bat shows a hiring manager can take a look at that checkbox and decide not to give them a call back, simply based on that fact. I know the first rebuttal is, what if they did these horrible things? Would you really want them working next to you? I know it's a little overzealous and a little bit harsh to be with the public to ask them, do you really knows who works next to you right now? The convicted have only been caught and punished. There are countless others who have never been caught. Now this reasoning is too broad and would never be used to convince a committee for a public policy change. Nonetheless, it's a fact. You don't know who you're sitting next to. There's also an argument that explains that ex-felons have poor working habits due to the fact there's a false belief that there's no workforce or anything that resembles one within the penitentiary. This is not a true fact. Most prison systems, inmates have jobs. Some pay, some do not. Either way, there's still an offender staff force present. I'll refer to a study that Jennifer Hicks Lundquist found. Lundquist advised of a work ethic for ex-felons that were allowed to enlist the military. She found that they were promoted generally more quicker into higher ranks than other enlistees when they were allowed to enlist. More so than others that were never locked up before. Lundquist authored Social Forces earlier this year. If convicts were able to have the same opportunity for employment that everyone else has, they would be no longer banned from 90% of the workforce. There would be a much superior rate of success, and thus less recidivism. Convicted felons went through the motions of facing jail time, facing a courtroom, losing that battle, and then entering prison. They were told if they served their sentence, their debt to society would be paid. Now, once that sentence had been served, that should have been the conclusion of the entire sanction placed on them by the government. If they continue to be limited in their options to be a productive member of society, they are, for the most part, forced back into a life of crime to provide for themselves and with their families. Now, I know I'm being general at this point. There's many other factors that go into being successful once you're released, but this is a major one. Stephen Raphael, author of Young Disadvantaged Men, said that former inmates face a number of challenges upon leaving prison that greatly impede their employment prospects. He stated that the combination of leaving prison, the average level of education for convicts, which is typically low levels of accumulated labor market experience, and employer reluctance to hire former inmates Among these barriers, Raphael advised about research concerning how employers view criminal records unfavorably and screen them. That's a contemporary practice. Now there has to be a clear plan of action that must take place. All convicts would not be eligible for this, getting rid of that box that they have to check. Someone with murder, rape, or child molestation would not qualify, and this would be decided at the state legislation. Habitual violent offenders would have to go through thorough treatment and very real rehabilitation before they opt to not check that box if that box still exists. If they cannot provide for your family, be real for a minute. If they cannot provide for their family, working at McDonald's or somewhere else simply for a bad decision they made 10 years ago, there should be reform to help you. Financial hardship is something that affects the majority of this country, and that exact pressure is much worse for someone whose options are limited by their own bad choices. Robert Morgan, one of the authors of the International Journal of Law and Psychiatry, stated that employment for convicts who have been released is vital in establishing financial security, which could lead to a more stable lifestyle. Remember, they already served their time. Their debt is paid. Move on with life. You will get a less return of persons back into prison and keep our record high numbers in the prison system down. This will give felons that are incarcerated hope that they too can eventually return to a normal life. This will provide incentive for them to behave themselves while in the system, making life easier for a brave correctional officer workforce that serves this great country. Let's ban that box and give them a chance.